Hey, Group Talk listener, Jason here, Group Talk producer. Our Group Talk podcast is growing in listenership, and we have exciting news for you listeners. Starting April 6th, we are launching the Group Talk network of podcasts. Don't worry, we'll still have your favorite shows, favorite hosts, and favorite topics. They'll just be on their own separate channel. And they'll be available wherever you choose to listen to your podcast. And best of all, we will be expanding and offering some very exciting new resources to help equip you in your ministry. Because a great network is made of great people like you. Hi, welcome to Here to There, hosted by Carolyn Taketa, former attorney, current small groups pastor, and life coach. Through monthly conversations with pastors, authors, and guests, we hope to stir your thoughts and encourage you to move from where you are to where you want to be, in your personal life, in your leadership, or in your ministry.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on Here to There, where we explore how we move from our present reality to the preferred future God has for us. Over the years, I've read dozens of books about small groups and small groups ministries. Some are great and some are not so great. Many of these books are full of theory and ideas, and many others offer practical how-tos. But it is hard to find the book that has a solid blend of both. And I really appreciate having both the why and the how. And if you can throw in some research, I'm hooked. So every few years, a small group book comes along that is the full package. And I'm excited to introduce you today to this new book, Leading Small Groups That Thrive, and its authors who are guests. This book presents a compelling vision of biblical community by providing insights on how groups can be places where people really thrive and are truly transformed. And the book offers really pragmatic, practical strategies and ideas and stories on how we can go from here, the ministry you currently have, to there, the ministry that you want for the people God has entrusted to you. And it's all based on real life research. So for me, it's a trifecta. And interestingly, the book is written by 3 authors, so another trifecta. It was written by Dr. Ryan Hartwig, Dr. Courtney Davis, and Jason Sneff. And I'm thrilled to have both Courtney and Jason on the program with us today. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're thrilled to be here.
So let me tell you a little bit about these two. Jason Sneff is the pastor of small groups at Eastview Christian Church in Normal, Illinois. I finally met someone from Normal, Illinois. It's one of those cities you always hear about because it's got such a cool name.
Yes.
And Jason, I recently learned, is a licensed professional counselor with 15 years of experience developing group life within both the private and the public sectors. Courtney Davis has a PhD in organizational communication. She's the associate professor of communication management at Azusa Pacific University, where she teaches organizational, small group, and professional communication. Courtney equips young professionals and leaders to effectively and meaningfully contribute to their groups and organizations. So thank you, Courtney, for joining us. I know small groups isn't your typical place where you speak because you're a professor, but you lend your wisdom in this space as well.
Yeah, glad to do it. And what a cool opportunity to serve the church.
Yeah, so congratulations to you both on this book, and it just came out in August. And I know as you heard in my intro, I'm so excited about the book, and I think it is one of the best ones I've read on small groups ministry. And it's not just my opinion, actually, it's shared by many in the small group network, including Steve Gladen, who's written an insert in the book. Very clever. You have these inserts from practitioners inside each chapter, which is so helpful. And so obviously Steve has endorsed it, and I have to give a full disclaimer that I was given an advanced copy of the book, and I was so honored to provide an endorsement, which is on the back cover, but I didn't get any compensation for the endorsement. So, Jason, what's with that? You got to get on that.
Maybe for the next one, we'll see.
Next one, maybe. I'm usually really drawn to books that actually have both qualitative and quantitative research about groups. And there's been some really excellent ones that have come down the pike. So I was impressed, and I think this adds a really great voice onto this. So I'm curious, though, how did this book come about? Like, between the 3 of you, 3 authors is a little unusual. And how did the 2 of you get connected with Ryan on this project?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Ryan is the connector between the 2 of us. Without Ryan, I don't think I would have ever met Courtney and consequently her family and the friendship that we have through this project. And so I've known Ryan since 2004. We actually worked at Colorado Christian University together. So before working in ministry. I'd worked in college and university settings and student life, and that's where the counseling came into play, working with students a lot. And Ryan actually was my supervisor back then, and we kept in touch through the years. I moved to Normal, Illinois, of all places, although we are not normal in any way.
That should be the title of your book.
Yeah.
Not normal from normal.
Not normal from normal. Yeah. And so then Ryan had actually written a book, Teams That Thrive, some years back with Warren Bird. And then he got approached to do a sequel to that with the Thrive theme. And so he thought small groups, and he called me up, and I was like, Ryan, this would be great. I would love to do that with you, but you need to know that there are at least 50 better small group pastors out there than me. And he's like, I think this is going to work. Let's do this. So I said, I trust you. Well, I'm all in if you're all in for me. And then he introduced me to Courtney. So Courtney, maybe you could talk a little bit on your end about how you know Ryan.
Yeah, Ryan was at Azusa Pacific University for a number of years, and so we were colleagues on the same department, and he and I had overlapping areas of interest, both in organizations and in small groups. And so he said, hey, I've got this idea for a project and for a book, but I really want it to be research-based. He's more of a qualitative scholar, and I'm more of a quantitative scholar. And so between the two of us, and then, of course, Jason's experience on the ground as a small groups pastor, it seemed like a really good team to put together. And it actually is really fun to talk about even the origins of our small group and the ways in which we wrote it. I think it speaks a lot to some of the data that we found about purpose and about how teams really come together. And so there's some really beautiful things, I think, in the story that God wrote and is writing through the three of us working together.
Yeah, it was a book actually written by a little group, so it makes sense. Right. So I'm guessing, Courtney, that you were the heavy lifter on the research, the quantitative piece. So walk us through that a little bit. Tell us about the process and who did you get information from? How did you go about getting the information? Then how did you crunch all that out?
Sure. So I remember Jason came to California. Ryan was still in California at the time at Azusa Pacific, and we carved out 2 whole days, and we had whiteboards upon whiteboards. Do you remember this, Jason? Whiteboards upon whiteboards of all the things that we thought might contribute and what would be meaningful and what are we actually trying to study. And so what we ended up doing is we were able to collect data from ministry leaders, so small groups pastors and ministry leads, the point people in small group ministries, who then nominated their top 3 to 5 small groups in their ministry. So we were asking for at least one of those to be the creme de la creme, the absolute best that they perceived, and then at least one of which that was above average. And so we wanted some degree of variance. And yet at the same time, we're not interested in comparing good groups to really bad groups.
And so that would be a little awkward, right? To
really
as a small group pastor to be like, oh, I picked you because I wanted to help this data on the what's not a good group.
Yeah.
So from those nominations, we then collected survey data from those group leaders and their group members. And so we have this robust data set, both from the ministry level to the leader level to the group member level. And we were able to look across all of that data. So I think at the end of the day, the thing that we really wanted to figure out was what contributes to an individual spiritual growth. So what about the group actually contributes to individual spiritual growth? I think we can sometimes look at good groups and they actually are just made up of really mature Christians. And so you get a bunch of really mature Christians together and then you have a quote unquote good group, but that doesn't really help us train group leaders, except if we were willing to tell them, just go recruit the really mature Christians and they're going to have a good group. Rather, we were able to do some statistical procedures that were able to hold constant that individual spiritual health. So apart from whether or not your group members were really mature Christians, really new Christians, we wanted to know what is the group actually contributing to the individual growth, which is really fun to have Jason on the team and to say, does that actually matter? What are we really trying to get at? And what's going to be helpful? We're not interested in writing a book that is not going to be used, for God's glory and for the good of our people. And so really trying to figure out how is it that the group is actually contributing to individual spiritual health. So then we looked at a whole lot of variables that we thought might contribute to the group's contribution to individual health. So what's the purpose of their group? How big is the group? How many members attend more than 50% of the time, more than 75% of the time? How do groups spend their time? So what percentage of their 2-hour long meeting or hour and 50 long meeting or whatever it is, what do they do when they're together? How long have they been together? And so lots of variables, of course, all in the appendix of our book. But we really wanted to do a pretty comprehensive look at what would actually contribute to people growing closer to the Lord and deeper in their relationship with others.
So, Courtney, so did you interview just to get data just from certain types of churches, or was it across a spectrum of different denominations, or how did you go about that process?
Yeah, it was as wide open as we needed and wanted it to be. And so we were looking for small groups pastors at a variety of size, church, denomination, and we looked at denominational differences. We looked at regional differences. We were really interested in kind of this generalizable set of findings. And so you need a pretty good diverse set of participants in your study, and we really sought that so that we can really say this doesn't just apply to the Midwest. This doesn't just apply to this denomination. This doesn't just apply to what's the language in your world? This idea that it had some sort of format. So are these sermon-based groups or cell groups or
type of groups?
Type of group. Are people growing spiritually in specific types of groups? And so we really needed to get our arms around that. And so a very diverse set of data, and then of course we did interview those in our best groups, which again we defined as the group actually contributing to individual spiritual growth. And we also observed a number of groups and wanted to see what was going on kind of on the ground and get that lived experience.
Yeah, and so Jason, I could see why they needed you.
Yes.
For that lived experience.
And why we needed Courtney and Ryan too, because it all kind of came together really well. And I feel like we had a really good balance. Courtney, you mentioned that just earlier. It was just fun from a team dynamic, the balance that we have and have had through this project. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, as I read the book, I definitely had some aha surprise moments because some of the questions that you mentioned, Courtney, like this is stuff that small groups people talk about all the time, because we're always looking for the silver bullet, right, Jason? We're looking for the magic formula, right? So, so I think, I thought, this will tell you. Here's the secret sauce. But there were some surprises from the data that you revealed. But before I talk about my surprises, I'm curious to see what were there any surprises for you in the data after researching it?
Yeah, I think for me, there's quite a few, and actually some of them didn't even land in the kind of final manuscripts too. So we got some things out there that are just kind of floating. But honestly, I think the biggest one for me was the core size. What the right size small group is for the best opportunity for growth to occur. Courtney would say that a lot nicer than I just did, but it's in there, and that was surprising. It's not what we have traditionally thought of as the prototypical size for a small group, and I think that was a huge finding in the midst of that. Another one was this kind of finds itself in chapter 9, and it talked about those best leaders and personal self-care habits. This was really surprising to me that 35% of the best leaders had a daily habit in the Word. And that
was surprising.
It's really low. It's really low.
Oh, okay.
As in only 35% of the best leaders have a daily habit in the Word. And so I think
your takeaway from that is
the takeaway is that we need to spend a little bit more time with each leader just to make sure that they are not doing certain things, but the habits and the holy habits and the formation is happening with our leaders in the way that we hope that to be happening. Yeah. Those are just a few. I mean, there's quite a few others. Courtney, what rises to the top for you? I'm curious.
I mean, the purpose of the group being different from what it is that the church lays out. And I think that became abundantly clear so as you think about my background in studying organizations, that there's a lot that organizations do to communicate said vision for a variety of their divisions or ministries or whatever it is. And the idea that the groups need to articulate their own individual purpose that is related to but separate from the overall church or parachurch ministry was remarkable to think about the impact that has on people growing. And then related to that, how groups then spent their time. There was a finding that said that the best groups spent 12 minutes on average on logistics. And you just don't spend 12 minutes on logistics, even if you're the most indecisive group trying to decide who's going to bring dinner next week.
Right.
It's not who's going to bring dinner next week or who's going to bring snacks. That doesn't take you 12 minutes every week. But that logistics time, so in comparison, most groups said 0. So as a comparative, most groups said we spent no time in logistics, and the best group said on average they spent 12 minutes. So that sort of communicates to us, and that's tied to the purpose, which I know, Carolyn, we sort of exchanged some communication before we got to recording. But this idea, Carolyn, that community is not achieved when we put our laser focus on it. And so fellowship and discipleship, if a group leader said that the main priority of their group, the main purpose of their group was fellowship and discipleship, their group members made fewer gains to individual spiritual health than when they said it was some outward facing purpose, what we called evangelism, what we called ministry, what we called, there's one, worship. And so when you think about this outward facing purpose, well, if you're going to be serving the community, if you're invested in workplaces, if you are doing something, well, it's going to take you 12 minutes every week to try to get your ducks in a row and figure out who's going to do this and are we making progress toward goals. And that is pretty compelling and backs up. I think that data goes together is to say, wow, that logistics and having to plan and work through arrangements is connected to that outward facing purpose, which is not about my own individual growth or fellowship or discipleship.
Right. I think that point is probably one of the big jaw-dropping moments for the book for me. Because, Jason, this, how many small groups, pastors, and directors get up every fall or every spring or whenever they do their group launches and say, if you want to, everyone needs to be in community. Everyone needs one another. So, go join a group and find your community. And you say in page 62, whatever you do, don't tell people that the primary purpose of your group is solely to build or to be in community. Telling people your group's purpose is to build community might be the worst thing you can do. And I was like, what? And then I thought, is this a mistype? What happened here? And then you kind of go on and talk more about, that trusting relationships are a byproduct of working together for the goal. So you need the goal, and then community comes as an outgrowth and a fruit of that. So it makes sense when you lay it out, and when you're talking about the research, Courtney, it makes sense. But this is going to be kind of a controversial finding because it's so counterintuitive to what we do in group life. Jason, any thoughts when that came out for you? Because you live in the small groups world and you know what we all do.
Yeah, it's easy. That might not be the right word, but as you look to connect people, a felt need is that we think that most people
we talk about
want
felt
to.
needs.
Yeah, we think that most people want to belong to things and that they want to feel connected. And I think that's true. And that might be an initial thought for people. But what keeps them and drives them and then helps them grow isn't that. It's what the group is going to do outside of themselves. And that's what the findings came out to be. A really fun story was last October, I was given I call it just the State of the Union address to our elders. I get to go once a year and just talk about small group ministry with them. And one of our elders was just, they knew that we were writing, right? We were in the process of writing, and we had done all the research. And he's like, what is the most challenging thing for us in our ministry based off of what you're finding? And first, I'd say the cool thing about this is that this is not here's how we do this kind of book. Right. This is challenging for my ministry. Like, there are 7 things right now that I need to change in ministry because of our findings. So I've given myself more work, right? But back to my point, the story was the elder just asked, what do we need to do? And I went right to this thing about purpose. Every group has to define what their purpose is, and specifically what the external purpose outside of their group is. And the really cool moment there was that he just paused and he was quiet. And it was quiet long enough that another elder was like, Chad, are you okay? And I just said, and he just said, yeah, I've finally figured this out. Because they'd been leading a small group of newly married or those that were soon to get married. And they were having a good time with it, but they were hitting the wall. And he just said out loud, oh, our purpose is to make sure every small group or everybody in our small group begins with a healthy marriage. And so we have to be laser focused on that. And he just had an aha moment. And that was just so fruitful to see that. And that's our hope, is for every group to be able to articulate that, because then that propels us forward. And that's what I think then creates some healthiness within groups, and just all the fun things that we think can happen in groups can really kind of be opened up to start happening.
Yeah, and I think those go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to jump in and say, out of the small group communication literature, what we find is that a lot of times the problems that groups experience are really just masquerading as purpose problems. So when you don't articulate a purpose, it might get people in the door to say that community is what they're there for. But I hope that, the small groups, pastors, and ministry leads that are listening to this would say that Holy Huddles is not what we're after. We're not just interested in getting people together to be Christian friends. And that ultimately doesn't persist. So it might get people in the door, but it's not why people generally stay.
And I think that would be the both and, right? That would be the felt need, I think, is for connection, especially now with the loneliness epidemic. I think the felt need, and that's very valid to honor, especially if someone's new to church, new to faith, new to a city. So to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but to say, hey, you can start with the felt need. It's a great place to start for a desire for friendship and relationship. But if that's where you end, then you really miss the boat. Would that be fair?
Yeah, very fair. And so it is that really delicate relationship that leaders have got to understand and be able to articulate and move their groups from coming in and desiring community and building it, but also how do we develop a purpose that group members say, I can't miss the gathering this week, because if I miss it, then the group's going to continue to move forward without me pursuing this particular purpose. And so absolutely, we're not throwing community out entirely. That's what it is. It just begs the question, what is community for, and how do we tie those things together?
Well, the subtitle of the book is 5 Shifts to Take Your Group to the Next Level. So in 1 minute, you summarize the 5 shifts. And then let's focus. It's hard, in our limited time to focus on all 5, but I wanted us to kind of focus on numbers 4 and 5. But if you wouldn't, one of you guys give us kind of the summary of the 5, and then we can drill down a bit more on the last 2.
Yeah, real quick. So the first shift is, we just call that going from confused to compelling. And it's all about purpose, articulating purpose. That's what we were just talking about. Every group being able to articulate their purpose. The second shift is from disengaged to dedicated. And it's all about setting the stage for a group, for people to begin to feel comfortable, to feel safe. In the midst of that, the third shift is from mine to ours. And that's all about ownership. And where, you might start out with directive leadership, but the leader's got to transition and allow for group members to step up into. So there's a dance there that we talk about from an ownership standpoint. The fourth one is from trivial to transformative. And this is all about being able to stimulate meaningful discussions, asking good questions, understanding how a good conversation can flow, and to get the most out of that. And then the last one is all about from an avoidance to embracing, because as a group progresses in health and in life, conflict happens. And so this last shift is, how do you embrace the difficult conversations rather than just avoid and run away? This season, there's quite a few difficult conversations that could be embraced.
And I really appreciate how the book is laid out, because you can chew on one for a while, and there's key takeaways in each section. There's reflection questions, discussion questions. So let me ask you this real quick. Like, if I'm a small group leader and I look at this and I think, oh no, I need to do all 5 shifts. How do I even approach that? It's a bit overwhelming. And then do I even tell the group, hey, we're going to work on going from avoiding to embracing? Or do you just kind of keep that in your own mind and not share it? Like, walk us through how you see a small group leader using this book.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So if I think about our book, that the findings are really about those who are just starting out new groups, but also those who have been seasoned leaders for decades. And so even hearing Jason say, yeah, the research really changes how I do ministry, that we are really asking and inviting leaders to say, well, what are the problems that you've experienced? And can you use this to help you diagnose and then move forward on a particular element? So on the one hand, maybe a seasoned leader picks it up and says, yeah, I should probably read the chapter on purpose, and I should probably read the chapter on setting the stage. But discussion is where I really need to hang in there for a little while. And so maybe I flip open to that and it becomes a quick reference, a good refresher on what needs to happen. Maybe you're experiencing conflict in your group, and so it becomes that chapter becomes a go-to for thinking about conflict. When you think about, do leaders need to move the needle on all of them? Certainly not simultaneously, and it certainly depends. And it depends on what stage your group is in. So if you're at the very beginning, and we detail a little bit of group development literature, if you're in the very beginning stages of starting a group, to invite all these group members into so many decisions will likely be very overwhelming for them. They're, as we said earlier, looking for directive leadership, and they want you to take the lead and for them to follow, and for them to get a better sense as to what they're expected to do and what the group is becoming. Now, if you've been together for a little while, and maybe other group members are coming to leaders and saying, hey, I'm noticing a problem. Hey, I notice that this could really be different or better. Then maybe that is a great opportunity to invite group members into that conversation about how to move the group in a different sort of way. I think also, as we think about multiplying groups and multiplying and raising up leaders, that certainly inviting something that we're doing in our group this fall. My husband and I lead a group of young professionals, and we have been raising up this one particular member to consider sending out to start a new group, or somehow maybe it's dividing our group. We haven't yet figured out what that looks like, but raising up a leader and inviting her into those conversations. Hey, let's debrief on Wednesday night. What happened with that conversation? How did you think that went? And now that she's reading the book also, we can have some much more interesting conversations and get some more people around the table to say, well, how would we address that? And what can we do to move our group forward? Again, for God's glory and for our good.
Yeah. So Jason, you've been sitting obviously with this information a lot longer, and you are also leading a small groups ministry. Have you used the material in your ministry with small group leaders from your seat on the bus?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Once we got our outline going, when we got into the writing stage, I just used it. The purpose in particular, like I had mentioned a little bit ago in that story last October. Right after that point, we began to really create easy ways for leaders to really define their purpose, and using some of the things that are in the book right now, and use that to our advantage. In fact, it's interesting how sometimes this works, but we had some seasons of conflict last fall with some small groups and small group leaders. I just literally opened right up to, chapter 8 and just started
I'm so glad I wrote this.
Yeah. Hey, this is great. I have a guide. It's right here.
Yes. So perfect.
Some really great people said these things. So here we go. But no, I'd say conflict we've used right away. The purpose was really good. We're about ready to start a bunch of new small groups, because we're going to do an all church study here in about 2 weeks. And so we're really landing in that second shift right now of setting the stage and getting new leaders to understand, whether it's online or whether it's in person, here's how you can really help everyone feel comfortable and get them moving in the right direction with the group. So, yep, I've put a lot of it to work.
Well, I found Shift 4 actually really helpful for training. That's one I've talked to my team about as they have conversations with small group leaders, especially seasoned leaders. I think it's easy to default from, just dispensing information in your study to facilitating transformation. I just love kind of that thought of doing both. And I think obviously we know conversations matter and we know those discussion times are really critical. But going back to what you said earlier, Courtney, about the logistics thing, for example, like that does not seem like that would yield transformative results. But there's something happening, some stickiness within the group happening during that time. So what would you advise for small group leaders that want to make that shift and make it stick? Because it's not really a formula.
Yeah, related to the discussion specifically?
Mm-hmm. The discussion time, yes.
Yeah.
Facilitating transformation.
Sure. Yeah. There's an element that certainly we can get really good teaching on Sundays. We can get really good teaching on Sundays, but
anytime really now.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. When you get into these groups where hopefully we've set the stage with a lot of predictability, where people feel like they have a place there, that they're welcome, that they can be in process, that the facilitating discussion is really where we get to work out our own theology and work out our lived theology. And is it okay to have conversation about some of the harder things? And how does a leader then facilitate the discussion, not having all the answers, but developing an environment in a living room or outside now in Southern California, or in a virtual space, to really invite people to process in the presence of other people. And so asking questions in particular ways, one of the things I've been saying for years that now made it in the book, so now I've got to cite my own work, is that what you ask and how you ask communicates what you know and how much you care. And so there's a lot of times where we ask questions that communicate things differently than the content of the question. And so as we ask questions about Sunday's message, or as we ask questions about this particular passage of scripture, the way we ask the question matters just as much as what we're asking, and helping leaders understand that matters a whole lot. So, as you maybe start a discussion with your group and you say, well, what can you apply from Sunday's message? And you'll hear crickets for decades because people don't remember what was spoken about on Sunday. What if they didn't understand what was spoken about on Sunday? And then you're asking them to apply? That's way too fast. You're asking people to move far too quickly, and we've got to lead the conversations differently and better.
Which also means you need to prepare. I think you can't just we're just going to hang and just throw out a question. I think if you're going to move to transformation, there has to be a high level of intentionality about the movement. And the intentionality of where you want to go with that. Shift 5, as we alluded to, we're living in very divisive, polarized times, and with elections coming up, it's probably going to get more difficult. So this idea of embracing conflict, that's a really hard one. It's kind of a level 10 skill for a lot of leaders. It's much easier to avoid it or to gloss over it or make a joke about it with all of that. So I know it's critical as Christians. So any tips on how do we engage in difficult conversations where we know people are going to have strongly held views that are different from one another?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. And I'll say this, the first step is to acknowledge it and to just say,
elephant in the room. Yes.
Yeah, there is an elephant here, or, hey, it feels really tense right now. And I don't know, maybe I'm drawing on my counseling background there. We've been silent for 5 minutes. So, there's a lot of editing that's going on.
No small group leader, Jason, is going to sit silent for 5 minutes. They have to fill in. Only a therapist can sit still for 5 minutes.
That's right. I tell my team all the time, hey, I can out silence you guys. So you're going to get to talk. Right?
Great secret weapon as a pastor to have. But I love that. I think that is the first step, is to just call it out. And then what?
Well, and then after that, to acknowledge that conflict is actually normal. It's not something that's on the fringes, right? Like when you bring a group of people together who are different, then it's only a matter of time. It's not if, but it's when conflict's going to occur. And so, we can even set the stage for this early on and be like, we're going to get along, and then something's going to come up. We're going to have different opinions on that, and that's okay. It matters how we communicate. It matters that we acknowledge it and go in that way. So there's lots of maybe ways to go about that. But what was really interesting, Carolyn, and this goes back to a research finding, is that groups that indicated that they were thriving, to use that language, had also indicated that they had had conflict. And in the midst of that too, hopefully I can say this right, Courtney, you can clean this up for me, but in those same groups, the leader didn't always indicate that there was conflict. So all it has to do is if there's perceived conflict in the group and the group was able to begin to work through it, that showed growth because it began to model. I think many of us just don't know how to model and walk through conflict in a healthy way. So this has great ground for us to take, even just by acknowledging it. And then, there's some fun steps that we can kind of get into a little bit more. But Courtney, anything you want to add? Did I indicate the research well in that one?
Yeah, no, it's really strange. The idea that we'd have groups, remember we got data from the members and the leader, and sometimes members would say that they had conflict in the group, but the leader didn't report it. Or the leader said that there's conflict, but members didn't report it. And I imagine that sometimes happens because conflict doesn't happen always at the group level, that we might have a conflict with one or two people in the group, or the leader knows about this one little thing. But it does go back to the conversation on purpose, that if I think about my marriage, my husband Matt and I have been married almost 11 years. And why do we get into conflict apart from our sinful tendencies? When we're willing to call something out and go, hey, Matt, hey, there's something going on and I'm just noticing this about you. But we agree that our goal is to glorify God and to be a brother or sister to propel the other to know the Lord more and to trust God more, that makes us more willing to raise the conflict. I think avoidance sometimes happens when we say, well, it's not worth it, or I'm not sure why I would raise it. And I think the purpose plays a huge role in that. So if we say we really want people to lean into what God is doing in their lives, to become more of who God has designed them to be, well, then I'm going to be a little bit more willing to say, hey, Renee, I got to talk to you about this. Hey, I've noticed something in the group. Can we talk about that? And so certainly when we come to divisive issues and things going on in our world, it really does say that our group leaders really have to establish a really strong foundation in September and October before things get really, really dicey in November. And so how do we, but how do we have healthy conversation around it? It is because, do you see how this potentially challenging conversation fits into what we've all agreed is the purpose of why we gather?
Yeah, that's really great to not have it be a separate thing. I think when conflict appears, a lot of leaders or members are surprised because, one, they thought they were getting community because that was the goal. So it goes back to that purpose. And they're like, wait, this doesn't feel warm, fuzzy. Two, and I've had people say this, but we shouldn't have conflict because we all love Jesus. So we all love Jesus means there's nothing, we shouldn't argue. And then that becomes kind of a mic drop, right? When someone in the group senses conflict, uncomfortable with it, don't want it to be there, then they just say, well, let's all just love Jesus and pray together. And then that's supposed to shut everything down, kind of spiritualize the whole exercise. And it almost kind of gyps the group of the opportunity for growth. Because when I read in your book about the conflict actually then brings forth more thriving, I absolutely agree with that. You know that we just know that in any relationship we have, it's when you go through the hard stuff and have spoken truth to one another and have been forgiven and extended grace to each other, that there's a greater depth of relationship and trust. I mean, that is how you build trust. It's not just built during the good times, but in a small group though, where the expectation is that it's just these people are just going to love and accept me. It's really hard to have, that piece of it, especially if they've grown up in a spiritual framework where if you just love Jesus, then it's all kumbaya, holding hands and everything's lovely all the time. I run across that quite a bit in people's mindset, this shouldn't be happening. I mean, how do you counter that in your training or otherwise?
Yeah, really, I think that gets at what is our own capacity maybe for conflict. And one of the things I think is helpful for me personally as we are going and writing through even this section, this shift, was some pieces about being able to acknowledge our own experiences with conflict. Because when we're all of a sudden faced in a situation when we are supposedly the leader and we need to be able to handle it for everybody else, we're still working through it ourselves. And so being able to pause and pray whether it's in our head, dear Lord, please help, or God, make something sound right here, intercede. Even just that pausing and praying can be formative. But then acknowledging, what we said earlier, acknowledging it, and then just going into it and say, hey, the goal here is to not be perfect, but we're going to walk through this because I'm trusting that we're going to be better on the back end of this because we are followers of Christ. We can cling to that, and that's going to help us walk through it. But let's walk through it, not around it.
And that's the commitment piece, which, I know you talked about earlier when you set the stage. There's we're not going to bail at the first sight of trouble, So, gosh. Okay. So we're out of time, but I did want to ask you, what is something that you hope readers will gain from the book? Courtney, maybe you first. What's something you're like, as you're writing and praying over it, as you send out this book into the world, what is it that you're hoping?
I'm really hoping that people, maybe it's a little bit selfish, but I really hope that group members understand that maybe group life doesn't have to be hit or miss. Maybe it's not just that all the stars have to align and that we just get the right people and it all goes super smoothly, but that we actually can partner with the Lord, and He invites us to engage with Him in cultivating these really transformative experiences. And I love the idea that there are very practical things that we can do. And so I have said for a number of years, as Jason knows, that to some degree I wrote this book for my husband because he's not trained. He's a web developer and he's not a trained PhD in organization and small group communication. And so to have him in mind, that my hope is that there are really lay leaders. I appreciate that the church is made up of really willing servants who need and want to be trained to do this well. And that hopefully leaders feel equipped to take a step forward and maybe can't move the needle on all the things, but at the same time, but can see it as a resource to continue to invest in the people that the Lord has placed in their care.
Yeah, and it is a great tool for small group leaders and especially for coaches to use with small group leaders. It's great conversation topics and questions, really good material to help equip, especially if you're not trying to do all 5 at once. That's a little much. What about you, Jason? What's your hope for this book?
Yeah, I hope that, we wrote this with the leader as the audience, and we wrote it in such a way that they could hear the voice of their group members as well as the group of ministry or the voice of ministry leaders. And so they're kind of just right in that middle. But I hope the message comes out is that they have what it takes and that they, God has equipped them and given them the call to step into something that is both immensely potentially rewarding and also maybe some of the most difficult work that we could really do with other people. But they have what it takes, and that this can just, as Courtney was saying, to equip them to do it well and to have confidence in the midst of that. I'd say a byproduct of that too. I love what you said, Courtney, about for your husband, Matt. And I would say too that this might even motivate some group members to begin to step up and to see what their role is in the group. We put a lot of emphasis on the leaders, and they're kind of, from a ministry standpoint, they're our main volunteers, right? They're the ones that we pour the most time into. But I think that there's some things in this book that will elevate the group members' role and responsibility in the midst of this, that can help make a group thrive more completely and have some more types of depth and interaction. So I hope that it hits at that one as well.
Yeah, that's good. And I think for small group point leaders, or mostly our listeners, it's a good blueprint kind of in general to use for just to check on how your groups are doing. I think the definition you have for what a group looks like when it's thriving is spot on. And as you build out the small groups ministry, especially to train new leaders, to kind of start putting some of these shifts in the groundwater early, and set the expectation that you're going to have conflict, you're going to need commitment, you're going to need a purpose beyond just having friendship. I think if you can set that in earlier, it's so much easier, isn't it, Jason, with newer groups than it is with existing groups? Trying to change the ship mid-sail is a lot harder. So I would encourage people in my seat on the bus as small group pastors to glean that from it as well. So I know you can get this book, Leading Small Groups That Thrive, anywhere books are sold. But if you wanted to buy multiple copies, I was just curious if you wanted to buy multiple copies for your group's ministry, where's the best place to purchase that?
Yeah, I think
is Amazon fine, or
yeah, I think so. Zondervan is our publisher, and Zondervan's website, I think they've got some bulk ordering on their.
Okay.
I think it's called churchsource.com would be really helpful. But of course, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Christian Book all have them as well.
Okay. And then I was recently also on the website for your book, thrivinggroups.com, and you have a list of free resources, which includes self-assessments. Again, because I love data, I went ahead and took the self-assessments just to see where we are. And then I was like, oh my gosh, we got a long ways to go. So there's some fun free stuff in there for you guys to go check out. And you can also interact with all three authors on there. And Jason, I know you're part of the Small Group Network Huddle in Illinois, and you are on our Facebook page because I see you pop up every so often. Mm-hmm. So if you have any questions for Jason and you have any questions about the book, when this goes on our Facebook page, feel free to interact with him. I just volunteered this of our guests. I didn't know if you knew that. Feel free to interact with him.
Thank you. Yes.
Feel free to ask questions, push back. Ask him how he can sit through 5 minutes of silence successfully. That's a Zen master skill that I do not have. Lawyers are not known for being silent, so no. Neither are pastors, right?
Or professors.
Or professors, yeah, it's a triple whammy for the rest of us. So, Jason, we need to learn that skill better. So you can interact with Jason on the Facebook page and also his huddle in Illinois. So thank you guys both so much for your time. Thank you for the effort in putting this book together and gathering all of that. I think it is going to be really valuable for our ministry. So thanks for being on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I would also just say on our website, we also just launched a new masterclass for new small group leaders. And so if there are churches that are looking for a resource that would be helpful in training new small group leaders specifically, please check it out on thrivinggroups.com. We'd love to partner with you and serve the church.
Oh, that's a great idea. Maybe they can invite you to come to their small group. Now it's all on Zoom anyway, to come to their small group training. Maybe you guys will be available for that. So many ways to reach you and kind of get some of the, some of the nuggets that are so helpful into our ministries as well. So God bless you guys and take care.
Thank you so much, Carolyn.
Well, thank you all for joining us from Here to There. And until next time, remember, we are better together.
Thank you for listening to Here to There, part of the Group Talk network of podcasts. If you like what you've heard, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you want to learn more, make sure you check out smallgroupnetwork.com for more resources.